love seeing how collectors have designed their display rooms with detofs or module spaces or sometimes even custom built cabinets. So I thought I would create a video and walk through the process I went through with my room and the final results. So all this started maybe about a year and a half ago when I started daydreaming having more display space than what my 5D TOFs had to offer at that time. I'm a less is more kind of open space type of collector. And fortunately, I have a decent sized collection because I've been collecting 1/6 scale figures for over 20 years. But with my 5D TOFs, I could fit maybe 25 figures at a time, and so was really challenged on which ones I would take out of the display and put back in storage. There may be a character I really loved, that character and the pose, and it was really hard for me to choose to take him out of the display, box him up to make room for a different one. So first I started research and discovery, which took maybe 6 months. And for all of this, I wasn't in a huge hurry at all because I wasn't sure if or when we would even be able to do any of it. And so after the discovery process, I spent about another 6 months starting to design, which I was inspired by many collectors' rooms as well as home theater rooms. My room is both. It's my collection room and it's our family's home theater room. I used an application called Blender to model the room down to the inch. I went into the room and measured everything, and then you use the application to really iterate on the design process. I came up with different designs with different, where am I going to put the display cases, and you'll see the rear row seat, theater seats are on a riser, and kind of what is that going to look like, and how does that fit in with the display cases and all of that stuff. I also created a design document that was maybe 12 or 15 pages long. And so my career, I've created and continue to create these detailed product requirement documents. So I leverage that experience to help illustrate my vision for what our collection and theater room could look like. In addition to that, I really geeked out and built these prototype display shelves. I wanted to make sure size-wise it was what I was expecting. If I wanted Iron Man on his dynamic stand, flying around, or is it going to actually fit Thanos that I couldn't fit in the DTOFs, as well as kind of the depth of it. Can I put 2 rows of figures? And the lighting, the channels, and the diffusers. And so I had all those in the prototype in the room under the dark lighting conditions that I like to keep the room to help me make decisions on like I said, the diffusers, the channels, the lights, and kind of the size of each of the display shelves. So after about a year of the research and design, I finally had something. And right at that time, my lovely wife said that our next home renovation project could be our collection and theater room. So I was super excited. And so this video will be in 3 segments. The first one will be going over the design process. The second will be over the renovation progress as the room is being built out. And then the final segment will be going over the final results. So let's just jump into it, and I hope you like it. Here is the old room. Here's our theater seats. In the back, you can see a riser for the rear row, the little downlight, some art on the walls, some more art on the walls. Here is the TV. Below that is the different gear and a couple other Hot Toys figures. Let me get another angle of the room. There is the collection wall, which 5 detolfs on a riser. Those are customized with lighting and backdrops and dioramas and stuff I made. So you can see a portion of my collection here, limited to roughly about 25 figures or so. And here underneath, I built an extra support in the risers just to help with the weight of the detolfs. Never had any issues with that, but I just wanted to be extra cautious. Here's a close-up at some of the dioramas, which were built specifically for that detolf size, so it gives me an opportunity to build new dioramas for the new size of the display cabinets. And here is, that's kind of my seat in the back in the center. That's where I like to sit. Here's kind of my view when I sit down in the old room. There's my TV for movies and games, and glance over to my left to see my collection, which I loved. It was great. When designing the actual size of the shelf modules, for the width, it ended up being fairly easy. And so I took the width of the wall leading from kind of the far left side all the way up to around getting close to where there's a door, and really just divided by 3. And so I ended up with 3 display cabinets, and the width of each one is about 41 inches, which I feel is plenty of room to build out dynamic scenes and have a lot of fun and put a lot of figures in that space. The depth, I had some design considerations, and so in the ceiling, I have some ceiling speakers. I had to kind of consider the placement of those when thinking about the depth, as well as in the back of the room, I have a riser for the rear seat, the rear theater seats, and there's 3 of them. And then the front row, there's 2 because we're a family of 5. And so I had to consider that space and ended up going with a depth of 18 inches, which is quite a bit more than what my old detolfs have, which I think is around 11. And so I guess me an extra 7 inches. But with the 18 inches depth, I figure that can give me comfortably 2 rows of figures in that second back row. Probably build some different tiers or little mini risers for them, and maybe do some creative environments there. So I was really happy about that. Now the height, I went through many different iterations, and we in that room, the ceiling is 9 feet tall, and I wanted 5 rows. Actually, I kind of went between 4 and 5 rows, landed with 5. And so I didn't just take the 9 feet and divide by 5. I ended up going through different, sorry, my dog's barking in the background. I ended up going through some different iterations. And some of my thought process around that was I wanted space for just standard 6 scale figures, kind of like this here, where they're just kind of standing, maybe museum pose, or maybe even something kind of dynamic, but they're about 12 inches tall. And so I wanted to consider that, as well as some of the slightly larger 6 scale figures like the Predators and the IG-11s and Chewie, and Thanos is really big. So I wanted to consider that. And then the third consideration, I wanted to kind of future-proof some of these larger things like the ATRT. Oh my gosh, I'm really excited for that. Like the Anakin on the staff that I have, if I want him actually sitting on it, and kind of hovering around, as well as things like I mentioned earlier, Thanos. If I wanted him with his thing up in the air, that sword thing, or Spidey swinging around, and so I kept all that stuff in mind. And where I landed was to accommodate, figures kind of like, like this one is the bottom and very top rows are 15 inches, which is about what I had in my detolfs, which is plenty of space for poses for just the 12-inch 6-scale figures. The next row up and down are 17 inches. So that gives a little more breathing room if I want to have maybe a death watch on my dynamic flying pose, or Iron Man. Predators would easily fit in that space. I have tons of predators. I love those, and not feel limited to where I couldn't have like one of their spears or weapons up in the air. So with that 17-inch space, I should have some more flexibility in how I want to pose things, as well as some of the dynamic ones like Spider-Man on those big diorama bases that he comes with. And then finally, right in the center is what I call my showcase shelf. That one is 25 inches tall, and so super excited about that, and super excited about how much creativity a space that big opens up. Earlier I mentioned the ATRTs. That should hopefully fit in that space. I may have to bend the legs a little bit to get it to fit with the figure. But kind of when thinking of that space, I like to build dioramas. And so one of the things is one of my all-time favorite movies and scenes is that last act of Avengers Endgame. And how cool would it be to build kind of a rubble diorama in that 25 by 18 by 41 inch shelf that has Thanos maybe up on some rubbles and rocks and debris with his double-bladed thing swinging down, and Iron Man flying, and Thor and Cap kind of doing their thing, all within that space. And so I have probably 4 or 5 different ideas about different large-scale diorama environments I can build around movies and characters and stuff that are real meaningful to me. And so that's how I came up with the dimensions for the shelves. And what makes me extra excited is I don't just have one, I have 4. And so on the main wall, there's 3 of those display cabinets with 15, 17, 25 inch tall, and then 17 and 15. And then on the opposite wall, I have 1 more of those. And on the opposite wall, there's a window, so I kind of designed around that, which I mentioned earlier. And so that was kind of my process for thinking of the different sizes. Another big factor besides the size of the display cases is the lighting. In my detolfs, I had a single light source per shelf. It was kind of in the middle of the shelf, shining kind of directly down on the figure. And for the most part, it worked pretty well. But where I was challenged was a figure with, like a helmet or some type of hat on, and the light shining down on that would then just cast a really dark shadow on the face. And these head sculpts are so awesome that, I didn't want to cover it in shadow. And so then I would maneuver the figure around in the shelf and try to get the lighting good, and at the same time the composition within the shelf itself to look good. And if I had more than one figure in that shelf, then forget about it. It's really a challenge to get multiple figures with the way I had the light go down and get everything to look good. And so when thinking about these new display shelves, I spent a lot of time researching lighting and different types of LED strips, and I think they were called COB LED strips, as well as just normal LED strips, and kind of the spotless and diffusers and channels and just all this kind of stuff. And I ended up building a prototype display just out of foam board, spent a couple bucks on that, cut it and taped it together roughly to size. and not just to see how the figures would lay out in it, but also the lighting. And so I bought some different light channels and diffusers and different LED strips, and would run some tests in the room under the lighting conditions, which I like to keep things dark in there because it's also a theater room, and to see what the results were. And where I ended up landing is I wanted a channel at the front of the shelf that angled at a 45-degree kind of to the opposite bottom corner. And that way, any figures kind of in the shelf are going to get that light cast on the front of them. And so I didn't want to run into the issue in the details where they had the light straight above shining down, casting unwanted shadows. Another requirement I had is I wanted to diffuse the light a little bit to help cast soft shadows. I didn't really want really dark, hard lines on the shadows, but instead something really soft, just to make the overall look, just feel, a little better. And I also didn't want the lights to be too bright. Like I mentioned multiple times, I like to keep the room dark. And so I wanted something dimmable. And I ended up getting these COB LED strips that have a continuous light rather than most LEDs have. Strips have a light source every inch or so or something like that. But typically with the diffusers and the channels, even for those, it'll cast a spotless light. But with the COB LED strips, those are definitely going to cast spotless because there are no spots. So I was pretty excited about those, and add, the other requirements. I wanted a cool light. I didn't want warm. They're dimmable. You can cut them. And so I was happy with all those things. And so in the prototype, I ended up doing some different dimming values, taking photos of the figures to see how those would turn out, to see what the light, how it would cast the shadows. Would the light fill up kind of the whole box? And just kind of went through a variety of iterations and tests. I had a lot of fun geeking out, bringing the family in. What do you guys think of this? You like these types of lights or those types? Or you like the milky white diffuser or the smoky gray diffuser? And kind of went through a lot of that before landing on the 45-degree channel with a milky white diffuser and the COB LED strips. Like I mentioned earlier, I used an application called Blender where I modeled everything in 3D. Here we can see me kind of spinning the room. This is pretty accurate down to the inch, really. I even modeled kind of some figures to scale inside the case, kind of what they would look like. Even some, larger ones like Thanos or Iron Man flying around. Here we have all the different viewports. Out of all that, I created a design document. It goes over the size, the lighting, how the door should close, kind of overall what the room should look like, and just kind of really geeked out. Dimensions that we can see here, how the light should shine at an angle. Here's a couple iterations of the design. Notice the depth of the riser and the height of the shelves and how they change. This is the final design here. I need to pack up my collection. Here's our dining room table with a few figures. Put the little hands, accessories, and stuff back in their little baggies. I use the makeup brush to dust them off before the figures go back into their box and into storage. And the room at this point is a total mess. And here's where the old Detolfs were, which my good buddy bought for his Hot Toys collection. And I have to find a place to store all this stuff, so my lovely wife let me take over part of the master closet to put some stuff. And my oldest son had moved out, so some overflow goes in his room as well. And we have our AV gear and the TV on the bed with the note so nobody sits on it. And we have an empty room. We were able to sell the old seats and riser, which helped fund this project. Just a little bit of artwork to get off the walls and the curtains that we're getting rid of. There's where the old detolfs were. We have all the paint picked out and the colors. On the TV wall, the entire wall is going to be black. And there at the bottom's old DVD racks. We're removing that, making that used for figure box storage along with the closet over here on the right, which will also be painted black. And day one, the floor covering is in to protect it. We got the primer on the walls and ceiling. Debating what to do with the crown molding. We like the design, just debating if we should paint it or leave it like that. And then we got some actual paint on the walls. The walls and ceiling are kind of a mid shade of gray. And then the TV wall is all black, so the screen as the focus point really pops. We decided to paint the crown molding and the baseboards black, and here you can see where they've been cut out to make room for the riser and display cabinets. Well, here's part of a cabinet, not all 5 shelves, but 3 of them. And also the wall, we have a blackout Roman shade, and continue working on painting the TV wall. And the wall is painted black, including the doors. Still need to do some more work on it. Got the crown molding painted black. There's one of the display cabinets. Here's the riser. So that's for the seats. That's a riser for the display cabinets on the other wall. Then we put an outlet down here. That'll power the front row theater seats. So right now the cabinets are all just kind of temporarily placed. We're going to go through some spacers and different modifications before we attach them to the walls. But one thing we did want to do is we want to put little gaps between each shelf to kind of future-proof stuff in case I ever want to run wires to dioramas. We're also experimenting with the horizontal spacers between the shelves. And there's my boy Cole. He's checking on work, make sure everything's good. And we have the riser lights installed. Those can change colors and dim. Still playing around with the spacing of the different shelves, both vertically and horizontally. We have a little access panel to the riser lights down there in case we ever want to swap them out in the future. Been working a lot with electrical lately, all kinds of lights and parts and equipment. And we're over here. We have this about ready to attach it to the wall. We have all the spacing figured out. There on the left is kind of what we're calling a control panel. And inside we have some different outlets. One will be hooked up to a switch. We just switch the light switch and it'll turn all the cabinet LEDs on. And here's some more updates on the lights and what it will look like when the room's dark. Here we have the LEDs installed on one of the cabinets. And of course I have a test subject up there. Let me get up close to see how it looks, make sure the light doesn't blow anything out. We're making some good progress. Here's some trim pieces. Those go all along the different cabinets. There's one of the cabinets. There's a shelf that's on the floor that hasn't been installed yet. And then there's the massive wall of cabinets. It's a work in progress. You can see the gap there at the top. We have to move the smoke detector, cut the crown molding a little bit to make room for that cabinet on the floor. This long board is going to be on the end and painted black to match the cabinets and help hide this control panel. So all the cables and stuff feed into here and will be hidden. Here's just an extra outlet strip to future-proof things. There's one controller for the lights. There's a bunch of outlets on the right and different switches. Another controller for another set of lights. More outlets and another controller that's used for the riser, and at the very bottom a little place to run some cables. A little more progress here. We've got the light switches and kind of the main trim piece up. Here's the inside. We'll have a kind of a little door and access portal to get to that. Here's the shells. They're pretty dirty at this point. We'll give it another coat of paint. And here's the other one. Again, we'll give that some paint, but here we can see the door partially installed. And we've started on the cabinet doors. So here's some frames with some beveled edges where we'll put we'll glue the glass in. There's a bunch of more pieces for the different sides, even more pieces. And then leaning against the wall are some of them that have already been painted. We're doing a fit test of the door frames on the shelves. Of course, I put my new Battle Droid figure in to see how that looks. And also playing around with the lighting, the dim level, kind of moving in close just to see how it looks, which I think it looks great in the room. You can see all the details without the light kind of blowing things out or anything like that. And so the doors kind of crop a little bit of the overall size, but not at the bottom at all. Here's kind of a view of the entire all the shelves. There's a bunch of the doors that are painted and unpainted. All right, so when I started making this video, it was 1.5 years ago. So this has been a really long project. The first 6 months of that was just building out the room and getting all that done. And then I spent about 1 year getting all the figures in. And during that, I would get them in, I would change some things, rearrange some things, and I ended up pulling out all the lights because the way they were originally installed, they just weren't that stable. They'd flicker and do some things like that, which would be very distracting. We know as collectors, we can't have that. And so I removed all the figures and redid all the lighting and then started putting the figures back in. And how I work with figures is, as we know, assembling them and posing them is a very delicate process. And I may be assembling, some little piece pops off and maybe I might start to get frustrated. And this collection's all about having fun. So if I start to feel that way, I just pause. It is okay. And I'll take a break for an hour, a day, maybe a few weeks. There's easily times I'll go, 3 or 4 weeks without hardly touching figures and things like that. At least not at a great extent, moving them in and out of the display cases and to storage and vice versa. So it took quite a while. And, some things have changed. I got some more gray hair since then, I'm sure. But anyway, I'm super excited and super thankful that it's done and ready to show you guys the final room. And here we go. Look in the final room and my Jedi Master plaque. So I do keep the room very dark. I wanted to keep the lights and the display cases kind of contained within that because the room's for movies and video games. There's 5 seats because there's 5 of us in the family. It's a pretty tight space, and so I had to consider that when designing the room. Here's a look at the main wall in all its glory. Do a little pan down. The flickering light's just from the TV playing. And here at the bottom, you can see the riser and chairs and the underlight. Here is the TV wall, which is black, and I keep very minimal, so the focus is on the TV. And continuing, that is a window with the Roman shade to keep all the light out. And then finally, here's the smaller display case. Then I'm standing in the middle of the rear row, which is usually where I sit. And here I am sitting in that spot, and this is my view. Turn my head left, and this is what I see. I have the camera pretty much right in front of my face. So I can't see everything because, just the tightness of the room and stuff, but I could see a majority of the shelves. And when I turn to the right and look up and looking down, that's what I see with the chair and the pillow next to me. And just a couple quick shots from the corner. The carpet looks weird in the video. It's just regular rug and carpet. There's a little stuffed Chewie and a blanket from Galaxy's Edge. And there's the main wall. And then the door to the room is here on the right, which, we painted black as well. And then here we are standing in front of that door, looking up. And on the left, that's the window. People, when they enter the room, they often ask, what is that? And I'm like, it's a window. I want to showcase a few of the shelves in the collection. I made a custom display base for this zombie Iron Man figure, which I feel is a very underrated figure. I love this one. This is one of my mini Star Wars shelves. The figures are kind of random, but I think all goes together. And I love on the left my Clone Wars family display. This diorama I made of a soldier just kind of reflecting after a battle was inspired by Civil War movie, the A24 film, not the Captain America one, which I love. And this diorama I made is very similar in theme, but with Jesse from the Clone Wars, maybe after a battle, just reflecting on what happened and what's next and where does he go from here. Of course, I have to have an Avengers display. As you can kind of see with this and other figure displays, I don't worry too much about having everything match up and from the same exact movie and stuff, just as long as it looks pretty cool together. Yeah, some of these photos aren't the best, but I think it gives a good idea. And this is my current favorite pose in the display, the Han and Chewie kind of buddy pose. This display shows the age of my collection, a bunch of, the Predator and Alien model kits, some of the old Terminator figures, and then Avatar right in the middle. I love the way the blue pops off the black background. I've had this Alien in my collection for, 10, 15 years. Definitely a showcase piece for me. And finally, my last shelf I'm going to showcase here, and probably my current favorite in the display, my Mando shelf. I do want to call out a lot of my shelves have risers for the rear row figures. I want to give a more vertical space in the display, and I attempt to space things the best I can to show the entire figure from head to toe. And of course, these little dudes. Just wanted to give some quick final thoughts. Very fortunate and thankful I'm able to do this, and not just the collecting, which I've been doing for over 20 years, but updating our room. It was about a 1.5 year long project, but totally worth it. People often ask why I don't put my workstation for, the computer and work and stuff in that room. And the answer to me is simple. I just want to disconnect those two things. I love the time in our theater and collection room. The kids often have their friends over and enjoy movies and playing games in there as well and have parties. And I tell them, just take your shoes off, keep it clean. Of course they do. I go in there after just to inspect, and it's always spotless. So really good kids. And like I said, I started making this video you are watching now over a year ago, and finally finishing it. And so I had a lot of fun doing it and hope you enjoy it. And thank you for going on this journey with me.